Have you ever questioned why life often seems unfair, why those who live with integrity face hardship, while the unjust appear to flourish, and why, during our most desperate moments, God appears distant or silent? These aren't modern questions. They've echoed through the ages, and within the sacred writings of the Bible, we find deep reflections on these mysteries of faith and divine justice. Long ago, in a dry and desolate region called Uz, there lived a man named Job. His story is one of the most powerful accounts of tested faith ever recorded. Job wasn't a prophet or ruler, he was simply a man of unwavering goodness. His devotion to God was sincere and complete. He turned away from evil without compromise. Among all people of his time, Job stood out as the most blameless and sincere. But Job wasn't just spiritually rich, he was materially blessed as well. His estate stretched across vast lands filled with livestock, and he had a large household of servants. His name was known across the East as the wealthiest and most successful man in the region, yet of all his possessions, none was more precious to him than his children, 10 in total, 7 sons and 3 daughters. They lived in unity, gathering often to celebrate and feast, enjoying the abundance that God had so generously provided. Still, despite all this joy, Job's heart was never without concern. Every morning, before the sun could rise, Job would rise earlier, seeking God in earnest prayer. He would offer burnt sacrifices on behalf of each of his children, troubled by a lingering thought. What if one of them has unknowingly sinned? What if they've turned away from God in their hearts? Job understood something profound, that blessings are delicate and life is uncertain. His prayers were not rooted in fear, but in deep love for both his Creator and his family. With every offering, he stood as a spiritual shield for those he loved. But far above the earth, beyond the clouds and sky, unseen eyes were watching, and in the eternal courts of heaven, as divine beings gathered before the throne, the peace that Job knew was about to be shaken. Far above the earth, in realms beyond mortal sight, the divine court convened a place of light, power, and celestial beings who watched over the cosmos. Among them walked a shadowy figure with purpose in his stride, Satan, the restless wanderer, the accuser of men. The Lord looked upon him and spoke with a voice like rolling thunder. "Where have you come from?" Satan answered without hesitation, "From traveling across the earth, moving through every corner of it." And indeed, his eyes had seen it all: empires built and destroy, cities flourishing then crumbling, hearts faltering, and men surrendering their souls for fleeting riches. He had witnessed the downfall of the once righteous and the betrayal of those who once stood for truth. But amid all the corruption, there was one man who remained unshaken. God spoke of him with deep assurance. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth. He is upright, blameless, reveres me, and turns away from evil." But the adversary responded with a sneer in his voice. "Does Job worship you for no reason? Have you not surrounded him with divine protection? You've blessed his home, his family, his wealth. Everything he touches turns to gold, his livestock multiplies, his servants flourish. Is it any wonder he remains loyal? But take it all away. Strip him of his possessions, his children, let him feel the agony of loss, and I promise you, he will curse you to your face." The challenge hung in the air like a storm cloud, but God answered with calm authority, "Very well. Everything he owns is now under your power, but do not lay a hand on him. A silent ripple moved through the heavenly host. The test had been authorized. Satan wasted no time. He vanished into the unseen world, and the fate of Job was sealed. The trial had begun. The next morning, all seemed peaceful. Job's children were gathered for a celebration, enjoying food, laughter, and wine out in the fields. Oxen worked the land, donkeys grazed quietly, and the servants went about their daily duties. Everything appeared calm and blessed, but then chaos arrived like a storm. A servant rushed into Job's house, his chest heaving, fear written across his face. His voice shook as he cried out, "Master, the Sabians." Suddenly, disaster struck like a tidal wave, swift, merciless, and unstoppable. A servant came running, breathless and wide-eyed. "Master," he cried, "raiders attacked. The oxen and donkeys were stolen. The servants who were with them slaughtered with swords. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you." Before Job could fully take in the shock, another messenger stumbled through the door, his face pale with terror. "Fire," he gasped. Fire from the heavens fell. It engulfed the sheep and the shepherds. Everything was consumed in an instant. I alone survived to bring you word. Job's heart pounded, his hands trembled. What was happening? Fire from the sky? Was this judgment? Was it a divine curse? But the terror wasn't finished. The third servant ran in, almost collapsing with the urgency of his message. "Sir," he said through gasps, "3 bands of Chaldean raiders came from different sides. They seized the camels, every servant nearby dead. Only I made it out alive." Job's world began to crumble. His wealth, his legacy, his life's work destroyed in moments. But the final blow was yet to fall. A 4th man entered slowly, his silence heavier than words. Job knew, even before a sound escaped his lips, that this was the moment his heart would break. "Your children," the man whispered. They were feasting in the oldest son's home. A wind came strong and wild from the desert. It struck the house on all sides. The structure gave way and collapsed. No one survived. I was the only one left to bring you this. The world around Job went silent. Sound itself seemed to vanish. Time stood still. The weight of grief pressed upon him like a mountain. Everything, his riches, his property, his beloved children gone in the blink of an eye. But Job did not scream. He did not curse heaven. He did not question the skies. Instead, he rose with shaking limbs. His face was pale, his eyes distant. In a gesture of deep sorrow and surrender, he tore his robe and shaved his head, an outward sign of inward devastation. Then, slowly, he sank to the ground and he worshipped. With his face buried in the dust, he whispered through broken breath, "Naked I came from. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return." These were the words Job whispered from the ashes of his grief. And then he declared, with reverence and pain entwined, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." This moment stands as one of the most profound expressions of faith ever spoken. Job had just suffered the unimaginable. His possessions were gone, his children were dead, his world had collapsed, and yet he did not lash out. He did not shake his fist toward heaven demanding justice or explanation. He surrendered not to despair, but to the sovereignty of God. There were no accusations on his lips, no bitter words, no cries for why. Job didn't understand why the storm had come upon him, but in the darkness he clung even more tightly to his Creator. He bowed down, he worshipped. He understood something we often forget, that everything he had, even his beloved children, had been entrusted to him by God. He was not their owner, he was their steward. And now, as those gifts were taken away, Job didn't claim injustice. Instead, he chose worship over wrath. That decision marked the true victory of his faith. This is what Christian faith truly looks like, not just belief in God's goodness during blessing, but absolute trust in his character even when blessings vanish. It is faith that stands firm when everything else crumbles. In Matthew 7, Jesus tells of two men who built houses, one upon rock, the other upon sand. When storms came, only the house on the rock withstood the winds. In the same way, Job's trust in God was not built on prosperity, but on a deeper foundation. Who God is, Satan's plan had failed. Job had passed the test, but the enemy wasn't done yet. As time passed, the scene shifted once more to heaven. The divine council assembled again, and Satan returned, slipping among them like a shadow. God looked upon him and asked, "Where have you been?" With a familiar arrogance, Satan replied, "I've been wandering the earth, going back and forth across it." God, unmoved by Satan's confidence, pointed once again to his faithful servant. Have you considered Job? Even after everything you've done, he remains faithful. There is no one like him, blameless, upright, one who fears me and rejects evil. Even after your attacks, he holds fast to his integrity. But the adversary had one more scheme. Satan stood humiliated. Job had endured unimaginable loss, and still he had not turned against God. The enemy had failed, but his pride would not allow him to retreat in defeat. With fury in his eyes and venom in his voice, Satan challenged once more, skin for skin. A man will sacrifice anything, wealth, family, even dignity, to save himself. But strike his flesh, hurt his body, and he will curse you to your face. He believed he had found Job's final weak point, his health. God, knowing Job more deeply than Satan ever could, responded with unwavering calm. Very well, he is in your hands, but you must not take his life. With divine permission granted, Satan descended like a storm with no mercy. This time there were no possessions to destroy, no family left to take. The attack would strike Job directly, his very body, his strength, his soul's dwelling place. Without warning, a crippling disease overtook him. His once healthy skin erupted with sores, raw, oozing, and unbearable. From head to toe, Job's body was plagued with infection. Burning fevers ravaged him. His flesh peeled in painful sheets. His joints ached. Every breath hurt. Sleep abandoned him, and nightmares haunted even the few moments he closed his eyes. He no longer walked with honor. He shuffled in agony. Stripped of dignity, Job sat alone on the ground, clothed in nothing but pain and dust. With a shard of broken pottery in hand, he scraped his wounds just to find temporary relief from the torment. His body bled, his heart ached. The man once revered across the east was now unrecognizable, a skeleton of sorrow slumped among ashes. Word of his suffering spread. Once, crowds followed his wisdom. Now, they crossed the street to avoid the sight of him. The respect he once commanded had turned to disgust. The laughter of children was replaced by whispers of pity and fear. Yet one person remained. His wife, though broken herself, had stayed. She had seen the collapse of their world. Her heart had been pierced again and again, watching her children buried, her home lost, and her beloved husband reduced to misery. She could not take it any longer. She had watched the world fall apart around her. She had seen the wealth disappear, the animals stolen, the servants murdered. She had stood helpless as every one of their children was laid to rest, and now the man she once admired, the man who had once stood tall in the city gates, was reduced to skin and bone, covered in sores, sitting in silence on a heap of ashes. She couldn't take it any more. With tears staining her cheeks and her voice cracking beneath the weight of sorrow, she approached him. Her eyes pleaded for release, not just for him, but for herself. "Are you still clinging to your integrity?" She whispered, "Curse God and just die." This wasn't cruelty, it was despair. Her words were born not from hatred, but from the agony of watching the one she loved suffer endlessly. And in that moment, Satan spoke not with fire or plague, but with her voice. But Job did not break. Though his eyes were swollen with pain and his heart shattered, his faith remained untouched. Gently he turned to her, not with anger, but with grief, and replied, "You speak as one who does not understand. Shall we accept only good from God, and not also accept the trouble?" It was not a rebuke of her, but a testimony of his trust in the Lord. Job's trial had stripped him of everything, yet his worship remained, and that made him unconquerable. Word of his suffering traveled quickly, far beyond Uz. People whispered about the fall of the once great man, but three names stood out: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Job's lifelong friends, men of wisdom and renown, were devastated by the news. Without hesitation, they left their homes and journeyed together to see him, to sit with him, to comfort him, to weep. But nothing could have prepared them for the sight that awaited them. From a distance, they saw the figure sitting in the ashes, his body blistered, his face hollow, his eyes vacant. Was this Job? The man they had once admired was unrecognizable, not the powerful, blessed sage of the East, but a broken soul crumbling beneath the weight of loss. Their hearts shattered, they wept aloud, voices echoing across the dust-filled land. Travelers stopped to listen. Servants stood in silence. The mourners tore their robes, a sign of shared sorrow, and reached for the only comfort they could offer. They sat down beside him in the ashes. They tore their robes in sorrow, then took dust from the earth and cast it upon their heads, an ancient sign of mourning, as if by covering themselves in the same dust that now cradled Job, they could share in his suffering. And then silence. Not a word passed between them. What could they say? What words could possibly bring comfort to a man who had lost everything: his children, his wealth, his health, his dignity? So they sat 7 days, 7 nights, no words, just presence. It was a sacred silence, heavy and holy. They wept with him, sat in the ashes beside him, and bore witness to his sorrow. In their quiet, they honored a pain too deep for language, but silence, however reverent, could not last forever. On the 7th day, Job spoke, and with his voice came a wave of anguish that broke the stillness like thunder. He did not curse God. He did not blame his friends. He did not question the heavens or plead for answers. Instead, he cursed the very day he was born. With a voice hoarse from grief and eyes dulled by despair, he whispered, "Let the day of my birth be erased. Let the night of my conception be wiped away from time." The friends who had come to comfort him were stunned. These were not the words of the wise, steady Job they had always known. This was the cry of a man whose soul had been shattered. His lament was not for answers, it was a cry for non-existence. He didn't want justice, he wanted erasure. Why didn't I die in the womb, he asked. Why did I not perish before my first breath? If he had died before birth, he reasoned, he would now be at peace. No pain, no loss, no sorrow, only rest. But instead he lived, he suffered, and he could not escape it. Why is life given to those who long only for death? He asked, why give light to those lost in darkness? These were not the complaints of rebellion. They were the cries of a soul buried beneath sorrow, aching for release. But death did not come, and God still remained silent. Job sat in ashes, his breath heavy with grief. He had emptied his soul in sorrow, no longer eating, no longer sleeping, no longer hoping. His voice cracked as he confessed, what I dreaded has come to pass. I have no peace, no rest, only turmoil. His friends remained silent, stunned by the depth of his despair. But the silence could not last. Eliphaz the Temanite, the eldest among them, finally broke the stillness. He had listened quietly, but now the words burned in his chest. He looked at Job not just as a friend, but as someone who had once been a pillar of strength. Job had been his teacher, his comforter, the voice others sought in crisis. And now here he was, broken. Eliphaz spoke. You were the one who counseled many. You gave strength to the weak. When others stumbled, your words lifted them up. When they were shaken, you steadied them. But now, when trouble has come to you, you falter. Has your fear of God meant nothing? Has your integrity abandoned you? His words were not cruel. They were confused. He could not reconcile Job's pain with the man he knew. So he turned to the only explanation he understood, divine justice. Consider this. When has the innocent ever perished? When have the upright been destroyed? He asked, his voice calm, but heavy with implication. To Eliphaz the world was clear. God is just, and if suffering exists, it must be deserved. The others nodded quietly. The logic felt safe, clean, predictable. If Job suffered, perhaps he had sinned. Without directly accusing, Eliphaz let the suspicion hang in the air. He went on, by God's breath, the wicked are destroyed. Their roars fade, their strength fails, their teeth break, and even mighty lions die from lack of prey. The poetry of his words could not soften their sting. Then his tone shifted. He spoke as though recalling a revelation, a mysterious vision in the night. Can a mortal be more righteous than God? He asked. Can a human be purer than the one who made them? If God places no full trust even in his servants, if he sees fault among his angels. He paused, letting the implications settle in. Eliphaz's message was clear. Job, perhaps you are not as innocent as you believe. Eliphaz never raised his voice, but his message struck with the force of judgment. He hadn't outright accused Job, but every word painted a picture, and in that picture, Job was guilty. In Eliphaz's world, pain didn't arrive without purpose. Suffering was not random. So if Job, once considered upright, now sat in the dust, ruined and sick, then the conclusion was simple. Job must have done something wrong. He didn't say it directly, but the insinuation was clear. No one is truly blameless before God. His tone carried the weight of certainty. Cry out, Job, he said. Go ahead, call out. Will anyone answer you? To which of the holy ones will you turn? Then he drew an image from nature. Misery doesn't spring up from the earth like weeds. Trouble doesn't come out of nowhere like wild plants. It has roots. It has reasons, and if Job was suffering, perhaps it was time to look inward. But then a shift. Eliphaz took a softer turn, his voice gentle, though his logic stayed firm. If I were in your place, I would turn to God, he said. I would entrust my case to him. He lifted his eyes upward as he spoke, as if seeing divine patterns invisible to ordinary men. God does wonders no one can comprehend, he said. He confounds the cunning. He traps the wise in their own schemes. He protects, corrects, and restores. He paused, then declared something Job had surely heard before, but now it rang with stinging irony. Blessed is the one whom God corrects. Do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. The message was this: suffering isn't just a punishment, it's a lesson. And if God had struck Job, it was only to eventually heal him. The one who wounds, Eliphaz said, is also the one who binds up. He painted a picture of deliverance. In famine protection ... and war rescue. From slender safety. Even wild beasts, he said, would be at peace with the man whom God favored. But to Job, sitting in ashes, those promises sounded far away like stars shining above a storm. Eliphaz crossed his arms and stared deeply into Job's hollowed face. This isn't just my view, he said firmly. We've looked into this. We've seen it ourselves. Now listen carefully. This is for your good. And with that, the room fell quiet again. The meaning was plain. If Job would accept his suffering as discipline from God, restoration might follow. But if he continued to resist, to question, to protest, then his agony would only deepen. The other two friends remained silent, watching. Job slowly raised his head, dust clinging to his beard, and hollow sorrow filling his eyes. Words of men, no matter how wise, couldn't touch the agony in his bones. Their logic only deepened the ache. And so, with breath ragged and soul trembling, he answered, If my grief were weighed on scales, Job said, if my misery could be measured in justice, you'd find it heavier than all the sand of the sea. His voice cracked under the weight of emotion. That's why my words seem reckless, because this burden is too much to carry. He paused, searching for breath, for strength, for meaning. If only God would grant my request, he whispered. If he would just crush me, let me die, it would be my only comfort. Because then, at least, I would know I never denied his truth. It wasn't healing Job longed for, not hope. He longed for an end. He wanted God to erase him, but the end did not come, and waiting had become unbearable. How long can a man endure? Job asked. Do you think I am made of stone, that my flesh is bronze? I have no strength left, not even the will to care for myself. Then he looked at his friends, eyes burning. Those who suffer, he said bitterly, look for kindness from a friend. But you see my pain and retreat. You offer no comfort, only fear. His voice rose in anger. Did I ask you for help? Did I ask for rescue? Job stared at his friends not with anger, but with a hollow ache. Did I ask for silver from your hands? He asked. Did I beg you to deliver me from my suffering? He hadn't come to them for wealth or rescue. He had come seeking understanding, compassion, a witness to his pain. But instead, their words felt like stones. His voice trembled as he said, I would rather die than take another breath of this misery. Eliphaz had come to console, but his counsel had only deepened Job's wounds. He urged Job to repent, but Job knew he hadn't done anything wrong. His pain defied logic, and yet his faith refused to break. And then Bildad the Shuhite entered the silence with his own judgment. To him, things were clear-cut. God was just, and justice meant that Job's children must have perished for their sins. He spoke with sternness. How long will you throw out empty words like a stormy wind? If you truly sought God, if you prayed with a clean heart, if you were upright, he would restore your life. Bildad claimed to offer hope, but it came wrapped in accusation. Your beginning was small, he said, but your end could be great if you return to God. He pointed back to tradition. Ask the generations before you. The ancients knew the truth. God never forsakes the righteous. The wicked, however, are cut off. Those who sow evil will reap it. By the breath of God they perish. To him it was simple. If Job was suffering, then Job needed to search his own heart. But Job had already searched, and what he found wasn't guilt, it was mystery. Weary beyond words, he looked to heaven and whispered, "You're right, no one can claim righteousness before God. But how can I even speak to him? He's not like me, that I could plead my case face to face." God, in Job's eyes, was majestic, far beyond reach. He stretches the skies with his hand. His works are countless. Even if he walks past me, I do not see him. Even if he moves, I cannot trace him. Job's voice was quiet, tired, but beneath the surface, sorrow surged like a storm. "I can't comprehend him," he said of God. "Even if I were innocent, what defense could I offer? All I can do is cry out for mercy." He looked out at the world and saw only injustice. The wicked rule, judges are blind. If God isn't behind this, then who is? He trembled as he spoke, a man crushed under the weight of divine silence. God has already marked me as guilty. Why should I even try any more? Then, suddenly, the dam broke. His voice cracked, not with anger, but with unbearable grief. "My God, why are you treating me like this? What have I done to deserve such punishment?" He turned his eyes heavenward, but there was no answer. No voice, no sign, just silence, and that silence screamed louder than any thunder. He stretched his hands toward the sky, desperate for meaning, desperate for mercy. But the heavens were still. If Eliphaz had wounded Job with insinuation, and Bildad had struck with accusation, then Zophar now stepped forward with a dagger of cruelty. Zophar the Naamathite looked at Job with icy eyes. To him, everything was black and white. "Enough with your words," he sneered. "Will you keep insisting you're innocent?" There was no sympathy in his voice, only contempt. Zophar saw Job not as a man in pain, but as a liar unwilling to admit fault. "If only God would speak," he said with cold finality, "he'd show you the truth. You're not being punished more than you deserve, you're being punished less." Then, almost mockingly, he offered what he called a solution. "If you would just set your heart right, turn from your wickedness, and seek God sincerely, then restoration would come." But Job had heard enough. He stood, his face lined with grief and indignation. "You think you speak for God," he demanded. "You think you alone understand the truth?" Job had reached the edge of his endurance, his patience, stretched thin by grief and accusation, finally snapped. His friends had misjudged him, portrayed him as a stubborn sinner unwilling to repent. But Job knew the truth. His suffering made no sense. He had walked in integrity, he had feared God. And if justice couldn't be found in the council of men, he would appeal to the only judge that mattered. With tears welling in his eyes, Job lifted his face to the sky. His voice quivered as he called out to the heavens, "My God, why do you treat me like your enemy? If I am guilty, show me. If I have sinned, reveal it. And if not, why won't you forgive me? Why won't you bring this torment to an end?" He didn't demand answers. He longed for understanding. And still he believed. Though crushed and confused, Job's faith didn't die. He made a declaration that echoed through eternity. "Even if he slays me, yet will I trust in him." Then the wind shifted, a soft breeze gathered strength, rising into a whirlwind, and out of the storm God spoke. "Who is this?" the voice thundered. "Who darkens counsel with words that lack understanding? Prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." Job had cried out for an audience with the Almighty. Now that moment had come. But the voice didn't explain suffering. It didn't justify pain. It revealed something far greater, God's glory. "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" The voice asked. "Tell me if you understand. Who determined its size? Who stretched the measuring line across it?" Job trembled. The voice continued, majestic and terrifying. "Who shut the sea behind doors when it burst forth like a child from the womb? Have you ever commanded the morning, Job? Have you told the dawn where to rise?" God wasn't giving answers. He was unveiling reality. And Job, so small, so frail, saw it clearly now. There is a truth more difficult than pain. It is this: God is infinitely beyond human understanding. Job had begged for answers. Instead, God gave him a glimpse of eternity, and when faced with the majesty of the Almighty, Job fell utterly silent. Then the voice of the Lord came again, strong and direct. "Will you still argue with the Almighty? Will the one who accuses God now respond?" Job's soul shattered under the weight of that question. He had no words left, no defense, no complaints. Then the Lord continued, "Would you discredit my justice to prove your own innocence? Would you condemn me so that you may be declared right?" Those words pierced Job's heart. That's exactly what he had done. He had wanted God to justify his actions, to explain his pain, to prove that Job was innocent. But now Job saw the truth. God's justice does not need human validation. His ways are not subject to our approval. Then God painted pictures of his creation, not to boast but to open Job's eyes. He spoke of the behemoth, a massive, majestic creature with bones like iron and a power that no one could control. He described Leviathan, a fierce sea monster, breathing fire, with eyes blazing like dawn. No one dares confront it. God said, "If man cannot master the creatures I have made, how then can he hope to contend with me?" Job trembled, and then he surrendered. He fell on his face in the dust, his voice barely a whisper. "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be stopped. I spoke of things I didn't understand, wonders beyond me. Before, I had only heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." He didn't get answers, he got presence. And somehow that was enough. Job had lost everything, but in seeing God, he gained something far greater. And as he repented, quiet, humble, broken, the story took a turn. God turned his gaze to Job's friends, those who had judged and condemned. The Lord turned to Job's friends, those who had spoken many words but without wisdom. With righteous anger, God declared, "My wrath is kindled against you, for you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has." Job, the man they had criticized, accused, and condemned, was now declared righteous before God, and they, the self-assured comforters, stood in danger of judgment. But God, in His mercy, gave them a path to redemption. He instructed them to present burnt offerings for their wrongdoing, and then He added something unexpected. "My servant Job will pray for you. I will accept his prayer on your behalf." Imagine it. The very one they wounded with harsh words was now chosen to be their intercessor. And Job, still bearing the scars of loss, didn't hesitate. There was no trace of bitterness. He forgave them. He prayed for them. He stood between them and God, and grace flowed through him. And then something miraculous happened. The Lord restored Job's fortunes. Not just restored, but doubled. Twice as much as he had lost was returned to him. The family who once turned away came back. They comforted him. They brought him gifts and gold. His herds multiplied, more cattle, more donkeys, more camels. The land that had tasted sorrow now overflowed with abundance. But the greatest gift was yet to come. God gave Job more children, 7 sons and 3 daughters each, a symbol of new beginnings. And these daughters were unlike any others. They were radiant with beauty, and their names carried deep meaning. Jemima, daylight, a sign of morning after a long, dark night. Keziah, like the sweet scent of spice, representing purity and joy. Karen Hapich, horn of antimony, a symbol of dignity, honor, and divine splendor. The sun rose again over the land of Uz. Fields once barren bloom once more, and Job, surrounded by laughter, life, and legacy, walked in the fullness of God's restoration. But his greatest blessing was no longer what his eyes could see. It was his renewed faith, now uncheckable. He had tasted the mystery of suffering, and discovered a truth more precious than prosperity. God is greater than we can ever understand. His justice isn't confined to our reasoning, and His love is not proven by ease, nor undone by pain. God is sovereign. His will is flawless, even when it escapes human understanding. Job no longer craved explanations because he had seen the glory of God, and that was more than enough. The man who once cursed the day he was born now embraced a life full of blessing. Years passed. Job lived for another 140 years. He witnessed generations rise, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And when his time came, he died old, fulfilled, and completely at peace. But Job's story was never just about suffering. It was always about redemption. He never received the answers he once demanded. God never explained the cosmic conversation with Satan. He never revealed the reason behind the pain. But God gave Job something infinitely greater. He gave Job himself. He opened Job's eyes to the majesty of creation, to the scale of the universe, to the power behind the stars, to the divine glory that dwarfs all human reasoning. And in that moment, Job finally understood. He had heard of God with his ears, but now he had seen Him with his eyes. That was the true ending. Not wealth, not restored family, not long life. The real reward was encountering the living God. And now the question turns to you. Will you trust God even when you don't understand? Will you hold to faith when the answers don't come? If you've walked through hardship, if you've wondered why We invite you to share your story in the comments. Let your testimony be light for someone else in the dark. Thank you for being here. If this message touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who needs hope. Blessings to you and your family. Amen.